Subscribers to The Australian hear episodes first and get access to all Shari's work on this topic, as well as unrivaled news, politics, investigations, sport and culture. Go to theaustralian.com.au/Wuhan to find out more.
I'm Shari Markson, and I've spent most of the past 2 years investigating the origins of COVID-19.
The Chinese city of Wuhan is under quarantine as the outbreak of the coronavirus worsens.
The federal government has raised its travel advice for the Chinese provinces to Wuhan and Hubei to level 4.
This is the front line of the epidemic in Wuhan, and it is bleak.
I'm declaring a public health emergency of international concern over the global outbreak of novel coronavirus.
What really happened in Wuhan?
In 1997, the streets of Hong Kong were objecting to the imprisonment of Wei Jingsheng. Wei was a young man from one of China's most prominent families. As a teenager, he joined the Red Guards, a student paramilitary movement under Chairman Mao Zedong during the Cultural Revolution. Despite his pedigree and connections, the Communist Party insider was thrown into prison in 1979 for writing an essay advocating democracy. The Chinese Communist Party and police moved swiftly and made an example of him. Wei was subject to a televised trial and thrown into prison. You're about to hear the voice of Wei's translator, who was present when I interviewed Wei in July 2021.
Because my case received the attention of highest communist officials, so therefore they did not abuse me physically, but they did abuse me psychologically. And in particular, they put me in a very small area, a small room, all by myself. Nobody talks to me and no sunshine. And I lost almost all my teeth in the 80s. That was about when he was in his 30 years old. And those are and my health also deteriorated rapidly. When I left the jail 18 years later, I only have 6 or 7 teeth still in my mouth at the age of the 40s. And then American dentists look at my teeth, say 3 of them are really bad. They must be pulled out immediately. So I lost another 3 teeth.
After spending 18 years in Chinese prisons, in 1997, Wei was released after a delicate diplomatic negotiation by Clinton White House figure Bob Suitinger, who's now married to Diamond Lu, who features in another episode of this podcast. Wei was deported to the United States, and he's now the world's most famous Chinese dissident. He's also a 7-time nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize. He's won so many human rights awards, including the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Human Rights Award and the U.S. National Endowment for Democracy Award. He's respected on both sides of the political aisle, and is praised by Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pompeo alike. Wei, you knew Chinese President Xi Jinping personally when you were a schoolboy. What was he like?
We knew each other since we were in middle school, and he has a closer relationship to my brother, who was younger. They were closer to each other in ages, and they had more contact in between them. According to the description of my brother, he thought Xi Jinping was a relatively bored person who's there to do something, and sometimes a little rough, but and relatively a smart person.
He was a smart person.
Also now the whole world scold on him, say how stupid he is. it does not exclude he is still a smart person but doing stupid things. Of course, when you evaluate a person as a president versus you evaluate a person as a schoolmate in middle school, then the smart is defined differently for the two different circumstances.
Wei was still young when he first realized China's communist regime had a dark side. Wei, when you were a schoolboy in the same compound as Chinese President Xi Jinping, you learnt a crucial discovery about China's development of biological weapons and the experiments, the depraved experiments that they were conducting on young, strong athletes. How did you come across this information?
That was in the 1960s when I was still in my middle school. And I have a good friend whose father is a high-rank official in the Chinese Academy of Military Science. And one day we went to their compound, and a bunch of us, the kids of high-rank communist officials, was sitting together and drink alcohols. And then we asked him and his friends, what are you guys really doing here in this academy? And so they said, oh, this mainly is for the research of how to prevent or how to study the result of nuclear wars or germ wars or chemical wars, sorts of things. So they also mentioned they always consistently have a team of dozens of young and healthy military men. They were fed very well, they were very healthy, but they were used for them to study issues like how the protection gear would have an effect on you in the time of nuclear radiation, as well as chemical explosion. And then meanwhile, they also could conveniently use as the guinea pig in human shape to see the result on human health. So now, too many Chinese, they knew not only the Chinese government has been conducted of their chemical and biological weapon experiment, as well as using those young, healthy men for their test of those weapons. During those tests, many people died, but there were also people survived.
In 2019, Wei was living in Washington, D.C., but still deeply connected to people in China. Over the years, he's become a bit of a lightning rod for whistleblowers in mainland China. Wei is often one of the first outside China to hear what's really going on. Wei says he first found out a new coronavirus was spreading in Wuhan during the time of the military games in October 2019. He warned his good friend Diamond Liu, a well-connected human rights advocate herself, at her Washington, D.C. home the very next month. On November 22, you went to Diamond's house for dinner, and you told her then that there was a virus spreading in Wuhan. What did you know about this in November?
Yes, in November, I had come to Diamond's house to eat. And then but before that, I learned this unusual exercise by the Chinese government during the military game. And so I told Diamond that the possibility of the Chinese government to use some strange weapon, including a biological weapon, because I knew they were doing experiments of that sort.
What sort of exercises was the Chinese government doing in October 2019?
I think the Chinese government has been developing biological weapons, as well as meanwhile the antidote that could to prevent the illness to spread. So therefore, I suspect that they have reached a certain stage, and they could do something to affect the world economy and the social order.
Diamond was hesitant about passing on information she wasn't able to verify to her sources in the White House, including the Deputy National Security Advisor, Matt Pottinger. Instead, she decided to connect Wei and Pottinger directly, which she did at a party she threw to celebrate Chinese New Year. What did you tell Matt Pottinger that night?
I have talked to him before that. However, Mr. Pottinger asked me on that day about this thing. At that time, there was another person from the U.S. State Department, another official, Miles Yu, was there too. Basically, I was telling him, I say, from the information I got, from my experience, from my childhood until now, I do think this is a biological weapon developed by the Chinese government. And so you must be getting yourself prepared and to deal with that. And I told him what had happened during the military games in Wuhan. It proves that Chinese government indeed developed this biological weapon. And that's what I was trying to convince him. And to the end, he responded to me with a smile saying, we knew a lot of things, some of you may not even know. I think Americans do have some intelligence about this, and they probably do have their own conclusion.
When Wei found out there was a virus spreading in Wuhan, he tried to sound the alarm with the intelligence agencies in the United States and a senior politician who he said had access to the president. Wei spoke to intelligence agencies about the virus that was spreading in Wuhan in November 2019. Can we just clarify that?
Yes, also in great detail in the similar contents and the detail as what I just told you.
Wei, did you have any sense that the intelligence agencies in the United States in November 2019 were taking this seriously, that there may be a virus spreading in Wuhan?
I felt they were not have as heavy concern as I was, so I tried my best to provide more detailed information. They may not believe there is a government of a country would do something like that. So I keeping repeated myself in an effort to try to persuade them.
Wei, which politicians did you tell about the new coronavirus in Wuhan?
I'm not sure if this politician wants me to talk about him right here, but I want to say he is a high enough politician. They are high enough politicians, high enough to be able to reach to the president of the United States.
The information that Wei was presenting to the government officials and the intelligence agents, was this word of mouth, or was there any documentation to support that there was a coronavirus spreading in Wuhan that might be linked to a biological warfare laboratory?
This is tricky because I think not only I do not have a solid documentation in this regard, probably even the American government don't quite have enough documentation on this, because there is a difference between science and politics. If we waited for all the evidence we want to see, then this whole world, probably half of people already died of this virus. As a matter of fact, you need to make a judgment before too many people die. That's the difference between politics and science.
On the 18th of October 2019, a glittering opening ceremony unfolded in Wuhan. It was the official start of the Military World Games, and 9,000 athletes from 100 countries gathered to compete before returning home.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the torch of the 7th CISM Military World Games.
女士们、先生们，欢迎。
Many of the athletes fell sick, and they later believed it was COVID-19. But they've never been tested. This could indicate that the virus was already spreading in Wuhan in October 2019. But to Wei's mind, it could also indicate something even more frightening. Wei, when you heard that there was a virus spreading in Wuhan during the military games in October 2019, what did you think this virus was?
The Chinese government had those exercise saying prevention of the virus from outside. But to me, which was a very large scale joined by hundreds of thousands of people. But to me, I immediately thought that was a biological weapon test by the Chinese government. That's because those kind of virus, when they were made in the lab, on one side, you got the lab results, but a true effect to a society would be much larger scale. So I thought that the Chinese government would take this opportunity to spread the virus during the military games, and then as many foreigners showed up there, and then to see which kind of effect is there. So indeed, a little more than 2 months later, there is this big explosion of this virus. This pandemic is widespread not only in Wuhan or in China, but the whole world. So therefore, naturally, I try to rationalize this whole thing and concluded that was what the Chinese government did. Another thing is that further enhanced what I was thinking is that at the beginning in January and February 2020, and there was a middle and lower level of communist officials claimed that say, oh, we got this antidote, got this antivirus or the vaccines that would prevent the spread of this virus from doing really bad in our society. You could think that low-rank officials spread this kind of words to comfort the people who were panicking over this virus. But on the other side, you could see they are really prepared, as they claimed, have the virus, have the vaccine, as well as the medication to prevent this virus to spread further.
Just in terms of the vaccine, how early do you think the Wuhan scientists had developed the vaccine?
I suspect that the Chinese government has been preparing this vaccine and those medication for several years. And probably somewhere around 2017 also, they felt they are on their way to be successful, and therefore they are ready to let the virus go. And with the vaccine readily available in their hands. However, shortly after the pandemic broke out, and some high officials probably took those vaccines, but still it was not very effective. And I suspect some high level officials even died, and that's why shortly after breakout, the Chinese government sent their best biochemical weapon expert to Wuhan Institute of Virology. It is very common in China nowadays that the Chinese scientists need to be encouraged or to win the way they want it. So therefore, they will fake up data and they'll claim things that or results that is not true. This is very common. So they send the best expert who specialized on biological weapon to Wuhan to inspect the whole situation. They also wanted to cover up the whole story. So they give the decree that no one allowed to talk about this virus or how much it's spread. They even punish the doctors or people who know the situation about this virus and how widespread it is in Wuhan. And another thing really we should pay attention is shortly after the virus spread, causing the pandemic, Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, gave an order to set up a law and regulate the biological safety. And that means even them realize this is a monster come out of the bottle and causing a panic and turmoil to the whole society. Xi Jinping loves to boast that himself has a lot of confidence, but it looks like regarding this matter, he has no confidence at all. Regardless, this virus was accidentally leaked or was purposefully released. It looked like the highest level of communist leader in China has been lied and misled by the officials of lower ranks.
Just to be clear, no one I've interviewed in government or intelligence thinks this virus was deliberately released. Not one person. Most of them say that the evidence points to an accident that was then covered up. But they can't entirely rule out a deliberate release. This is China, after all. Wei's personal view, however, is that it would be within the realm of Chinese Communist Party conduct to release this virus, although he does not have any evidence to support this theory. Wei, what evidence do you have that this was from a biological warfare laboratory or that this might have been a pre-planned attack with a vaccine developed as early as 2017? Is this information people, whistleblowers, have told you directly?
I have to say that I use my rational judgment to reach such a conclusion. And there was some information people in China told me about. Unfortunately, I cannot say much more to what degree, and I cannot say who the person is. The information I got is from people who does have inside information, but I really do not want to jeopardize their safety to talk much more about it.
As COVID-19 spread around the world, Wei, like many of us, watched as the official narrative of the Chinese Communist Party took hold. This wasn't a coincidence that the official line of the world's largest authoritarian regime became the dominant narrative. During the investigation for my book, I spoke to the former head of the National Security Council China desk, Matt Turpin, and what he said was a watershed moment for me. He said this is what the Communist Party has spent decades since Tiananmen preparing for, a bad news story that threatens the regime, and they've been making sure the party has the influence and the media and the propaganda apparatus to be able to control the narrative. Turpin says it's why they've spent billions of dollars on all those influence operations, cultivating politicians and influential figures around the world, including in Australia. The Chinese Communist Party, as we know, has infiltrated think tanks, Chinese language media outlets, universities, political parties, and even parliaments. Wei, since the start of the pandemic, we've been told that a potential laboratory leak is a conspiracy theory. Do you think there was an active disinformation campaign emanating from the Chinese Communist Party?
The Chinese Communist regime is very good to buy out the scientists, the academic, even the news media, to serve for their own purpose, especially when it comes to a crisis. You would notice the communist regime would design some theory for those people in the West to sell to the others, which including this conspiracy theory. For this turn, this conspiracy theory was not enough to stop people's anger and suspicions of the communist regime. So now they even have the second theory to support it, which is it is the American government did this research and developed this virus in its military base in Fort Decorat. And this could be very well summarized with the ancient Chinese intelligence. One is called to use offense as defense. The other is to bite you back.
Would this have been an orchestrated campaign?
Of course. The communist regime is a very experienced expert to organize those with their decades of experiment, decades of history and conduct to cover up the truth and to mislead the audience. This is the habit of the communist regime is regardless whatever truth is, whatever works is the best. To summarize, it could be summarized by Deng Xiaoping's well-known phrase, say, regardless this cat is white or black, if it catches a mouse, it's a good cat.
While this is the first pandemic in 100 years, Wei says it's unlikely to be the last coming out of China. How extensive is China's biological warfare program? Should we be expecting more pandemics in the future? How worried should we be?
The Chinese biological program started during the time China was cozy with the former Soviet Union, such as the father of my childhood friend, who really went to study in Soviet Union back in the 50s and come back with all the knowledge. However, in the last 20 or so years, it is helped by the Americans and as well as the Europeans. So they were able to develop this program rapidly, tremendously. And if the international society cannot punish the communist regime this time, I think it will do another pandemic in even larger scale, in an even worse circumstance. One always should remember the communist regime's behavior pattern. If you are not strong enough, too soft, then it will strike you hard, very hard. And if you ever try to defend, to oppose, and to strike back, then it will be softened up. So I really wish to take this opportunity with the international society to punish the communist regime in China severely. Only when you are doing this, and then only when it is hurt, it may stop it. Otherwise, another tragedy may appear again.
What Really Happened in Wuhan is presented by The Australian. It's written and produced by me, Shari Markson, and The Australian's editorial director, Claire Harvey. It was produced by Leah Samaglu. My book, What Really Happened in Wuhan, is available online at Amazon, in bookstores in Australia at Dimox, or wherever you buy your books.